For 300 years, the Muslim House of Umayyah ruled the Iberian Peninsula, first as caliphs of the largest empire the world had ever seen, then as emirs of a fighting kingdom in the far west, then caliphs again of an independent great power. After swiftly conquering the Visigothic kingdom that had kicked the Romans out of Iberia, the city of Cordoba was firmly established as the center of Islamic rule in Spain, blossoming as a center of the arts and sciences for centuries to come. Cordoba is remembered fondly even in the West as a bastion of tolerance in an age of religious zealotry. Of course, this is a view that comes from rose-tinted lenses, a picture painted to contrast the horrors of the Spanish Inquisition and the conquest of the Americas. In truth, the tolerant nature of Andalusia was only impressive relative to its contemporaries, and even then only in most places and in most of the time. Even then, the emirate's reputation is hardly unearned. The scientific, literary, and legal accomplishments of the caliphate truly were impressive, and unrivaled by most of the time's Mediterranean. Yet, no empire lasts forever, and so was with the House of Umayyah. By its latter days, the caliphate had shattered into a series of small Taifa kingdoms, bitterly divided on political and ethnic grounds, as the split between Berbers and Arabs tore the empire to shreds. Though the Taifas had retained much of Andalusia's rich culture, militarily they were utterly inferior to their northern Christian neighbors, even further exacerbated by the fact that the Christians had managed to unite multiple times by personal union, while the Taifas remained completely divided. After the fall of the key Andalusian stronghold of Toledo in 1085, the Moroccan Almoravids were invited to the peninsula to fight the Christians, taking it over and ending the Andalusian fitna. Under the rule of them and their Almohad successors, al-Andalus's tolerant administration was stripped away, and a strict interpretation of Islamic law was enforced from Lisbon to Zaragoza. The Moroccan possessions were slowly chipped away, until eventually only Granada remained standing, itself being lost in 1492. So, with such a grim future ahead of them, how do we save Andalusia? This is not a very innovative concept for an alternate history scenario. If you're into the genre, you've probably stumbled on a surviving Muslim Spain or two before. What bothers me is that they tend to achieve this by just having Umayyad Cordoba never fall, which runs into the problem that late Umayyad Cordoba was already very weak and fragmented. Of course, we can fix or handwave these internal issues, but this is still kind of a boring solution to me. I'm generally not a fan of having the divergence to alternate history just be this country just doesn't collapse, and I think we can do something a little more interesting. No empire lasts forever, but a cultural continuum can last a really long time. Our goal, then, is not to keep any specific state on life support, but to keep Andalusia as a concept strong and independent. However, we have a pretty short window to work with, between the dissolution of the Cordoba Caliphate in 1031 and the conquest of Spain by the Almoravids in 1090. And since the Christians were so much stronger militarily than the Taifas at this point, our only chance really is to have the Taifas unite themselves somehow. But that would require both a major event to scare the Taifas into line and a strong enough leader for them to rally behind. What if... It's the spring of 1085 in Toledo, center of the domains of the Sultanate kingdom in Spain. The city is surrounded by the banners of Alfonso VI, King of Leon, Galicia, and Castile. Toledo has long stood as the wall protecting the great cities of al-andalus from the Latin kings, and its fall would spell disaster for the peninsula's Umar. At the verge of destruction, Taifa Yahya al-Qadir is forced to beg his neighbors for aid, but the great princes of the west feared the might of the Leonese and refused him. All, that is, but the Prince of Seville, the White Hawk of Andalusia, Al-Mutamid Muhammad ibn Abad al-Lakham. Side note, Al-Mutamid was a real figure, but for the timeline to work, we're making him the second coming of Tariq ibn Ziyad here. The Abadid prince had been paying close attention to the situation in Toledo since the Doldanid sovereign Ismail al-Ma'mun's assassination in 1075, and now was faced with his final chance to act. Were Toledo to fall, Cordoba and Seville would be wide open for Latin conquest, and soon Badajoz and Valencia would follow. So, in early April, an emissary had come from Seville with an offer: support in the war in exchange for al-Qadir's submission. It wasn't long until Abadid troops began marching north. Despite the promise of assistance, the people of Toledo refused to be subject to a siege for the sake of the unpopular al-Qadir, and before Prince Abad could even arrive, the city had come to a negotiated surrender with King Alfonso. Yahya soon found himself in the camp of a furious emir, and though he is still recognized as a rightful sovereign of Toledo, in practice he is sent back to Seville for the time being, while the remaining Doldanid territories are instead administered by Al-Mutamid directly, who still intends on fighting the Christians. Now outnumbered and in a precarious position, the prince decides to retreat for the time being, but is attacked by the Leonese Castilian forces in La Mancha. Here, Abad proves himself a brilliant general, managing to cover his retreat against overwhelming odds and still land a severe blow to the Christian host. With Alfonso holding off on an invasion of Seville, Al-Mutamid uses the opportunity to call for an assembly of the Muslim kingdoms in Cordoba, hoping to rally them against the Castilian enemy. In what became known as the First Mutamar, only the Banu Hud of Zaragoza and Valencia pledged any meaningful support to Seville. But this did sow the seeds for the Abbadid claim to a position of primacy in the peninsula, and by calling for a meeting in Cordoba, they in a way presented themselves as a successor to the Umayyad rulers of the city. After the arrival of fresh troops from Valencia, as well as new recruits raised in the Abbadid's home territories, Prince Abad began to prepare for his next confrontation. He had come to discover that Alfonso was planning a sack of Lisbon, hoping to weaken the Aftacid rulers of Badajoz into neutrality before they pledged their banners to Seville. With this in mind, Al-Mutamid saw an opportunity not only to score a victory against the Christians, but to win favor with the other Taifas by protecting them against the foreign invaders. The Abbadid host began to secretly march not to Lisbon, but to Badajoz, and when the Leonese armies marched back home, burdened by their spoils from the raid, Al-Mutamid was there to intercept them, forcing the Latins to retreat with great injury and abandon their spoils won at Lisbon. This was King Alfonso's first true defeat, and the first time since Cordoba reigned supreme that a Muslim army had inflicted a major loss on a Christian one in the peninsula. After Lisbon, the Aftacids had pledged their swords to the Abbadid cause, but the emir still wanted a decisive victory from which to secure his position. His wish would be granted in 1087, when Alfonso attacked Abbadid-allied Valencia in order to sever Zaragoza from the coalition. Here, the Christian armies were utterly crushed, opening an easy avenue for the conquest of Toledo. It was within the walls of the mighty Islamic fortress of Tulaytullah that Ibn Abad called for a second Mutamar, being crowned Emir of Cordoba and Sultan of al-Andalus. Given the troubled end to the Umayyad rule over the peninsula, the Emir elected not to take the title of Caliph. Despite the humiliating defeat, the Leonese monarchy remained a powerful foe to the north, and the new Abbadid Sultanate remained fractured. Granada, historically bitter rivals of Seville, had rejected the call to Mutamar and allied with the Castilians against the new Sultan. Betting that Alfonso would not renew the war before assembling a proper army, Sultan Abad marched on the Zirid domains, and sure enough did not encounter any Castilian resistance. Al-Mutamid spent the next several years consolidating his control over his new feudatories, massively ballooning the Abbadid army, and enacting tax reforms to raise enough revenue to cover the new expenses. Alfonso was by all means a great king, but with the backing of the educated Andalusian high society from which to pull talent from, Al-Mutamid had a far greater court, which would make all the difference over the years of build-up that they both had ahead of them. The war finally came in 1097, when the small Berber tribe of the Banu Razin defected to the Castilians upon promises of acquiring Hudid Valencia. Despite a challenging campaign that cost both kings their eldest sons, the White Hawk of Seville would crush the Castilians at the rebel capital of Albarracin, only halted from complete destruction of the Castilian realm by a narrow Christian victory at Salamanca in 1100. Though the defeat was not devastating on its own, the internal strife brought to al-Andalus by the death of the Sultan Zair al-Mamun earlier in the war made this an opportune moment for peace, which allowed both sides to settle their pressing succession issues before it was too late. The Christian kingdoms would remain sovereign for a few years more, but it was clear that the future of Iberia would be decided in Seville, not Burgos. Now secure diplomatically, Al-Mutamid dedicates his attention to securing his internal position. To appease the powerful Hudids, he betrothed his infant son Al-Rahman to the Zaragozan princess Camilla bint Abu ibn Hud, and his daughter Bufaina to Wali al-Mutasim ibn Sumaji of Almeria, made a powerful vassal by seizing Granada after the conquest of the Zirid domains. With Zaragoza, Granada, Seville, and Toledo on board of Al-Rahman's succession, the future of the Sultanate would be secure, and just in time, as the White Hawk passed away in 1104. Al-Mutamid left behind not only a powerful and united kingdom, but a ravaged neighborhood incapable of meaningfully challenging Andalusian unification. Upon his death, the 14-year-old Al-Rahman was placed under the regency of Al-Mutasim of Almeria, but in practice it was Bufaina who governed from the shadows. The Abbasid Prince of Badajoz, quietly growing in wealth and power ever since Toledo, used the opportunity to bring the country to civil war. Allying himself with the Valencia branch of the Hooded family, Al-Aftas attempted to pincer Seville before bringing it to submission. Thanks to Bufaina's diplomatic brilliance and Sumadih al-Rahman's military skill, the Prince of Badajos's head was soon paraded around Cordoba. Upon coming of age in 1107, Al-Rahman began to work on his ambition to end the Leonese monarchy once and for all. He would find an opportunity soon, as in 1109 King Alfonso VI died and was succeeded by a woman, bringing chaos to the northern crown. The Sultan quickly moved in to restore order, annexing everything south of the Douro and establishing puppet princes in Galicia, Leon, and Castile. Aragon and Pamplona were soon also overrun, and by the turn of the decade, Barcelona was the only city in the peninsula left to submit to Seville's rule. The crumbling of the Latin kingdoms led to increasing calls for a Western crusade in Europe. But with Al-Rahman at the height of his power and Andalusia deep into an economic boom, as well as due to Spain being a relative periphery to Christian desire compared to Jerusalem, it seemed that a combined European campaign in the region would be unlikely for the time being. Instead, it would fall upon William IX of Aquitaine to rally up his own resources for a southern assault. Organizing pacts with the Latin princes and mustering up supplies, William found his time to strike in 1124, after the death of Princess Bufaina brought Andalusian administration into a period of disarray. Unfortunately for the Duke of Aquitaine, the Sultan's new candidate for Hajib after the death of Bufaina was the cunning Mozara bureaucrat Garcia Muawiyah ibn Nasr, who expanded Andalusia's spy network into a degree of sophistication unrivaled until the Aybak Sultan of Egypt a century into the future. Thanks to Garcia's efforts, Al-Rahman knew of William's invasion well before any Frenchmen crossed the Pyrenees, and though a divided attention between the Latins in the west and the Aquitans in the east led to some initial failure to secure Pamplona, the Christians were eventually forced to retreat, leading to a reorganization of the principalities and even a conquest of Barcelona. The peak of Andalusian power was undoubtedly during the latter days of Al-Rahman's reign, quickly growing into one of Europe's most influential financial centers. Seville enjoyed a unique position as a gateway between East and West. The Sultanate developed strong economic ties to the English, albeit illicitly, as their trade was technically considered smuggling by London, which they just conveniently nearly universally failed to stop. This partnership eventually blossomed into one of the world's most consequential alliances that would determine the outcome of the 100 Years' War, though that wouldn't be cemented completely until a little after the scope of this video. Domestically, a period of unprecedented peace and stability led to a renaissance of Andalusian art and poetry, alongside a wealth of scientific advancements. Maritime technology became a popular interest of Garcia's, and under his patronage the Yatabid would host one of the more impressive navies of the age. Though for now still dwarfed by the might of Venice and Genoa, these developments set the seed for the later age of total Andalusian hegemony over the high seas. Jewish and Christian communities blossomed under Al-Rahman's leadership. Jews fleeing Almohad doctrine in Morocco found safe refuge in Andalusia's cities, becoming an important social class and a preferred choice for bureaucrats in the realm's peripheries. The newly conquered northern territories were redistributed among new Muslim princes, with the Nasrid family, which Hajib Garcia belonged to, notably being awarded the key fortress of Burgos. The Sultan died shortly after leading his troops to victory against an Almohad invasion in 1158, though for the next few generations Seville would remain in capable hands. The early 13th century saw the Sultanate in a comfortable position, able to project its power abroad while being internally safe in its Iberian fortress. With their newfound financial flexibility, the Abbadids quickly began to meddle in North African affairs. After the crumbling of the Almohad movement in the middle of the 13th century, al-Andalus quickly came in to occupy the key harbors of the Rif, most notably Ceuta and Tangier. This proved an unwise decision, as the Marinids would soon reunite the west of the continent and become a major thorn in Seville's side. By the end of the century, the Abbadid position began to decline. The general economic turmoil of the 14th century hit Andalusia quite hard, and discontent towards the incompetence of Sultan Mamun al-Laham led to a weakening of central authority over the provinces. The constant conflict in the Maghreb significantly strained Andalusian resources, with the Marinids forcing constant intervention to protect trade interests in the Strait of Gibraltar. Conflicts between the Huddids of Zaragoza and the Nasrids of Burgos weakened the legitimacy of the central government even further, and these tensions eventually boiled into a civil war. In 1317, Al-Mamun died, leaving a weakened realm to his infant son Yusuf Muhammad al-Abad. Seeing the opportunity, the Christian princes proclaimed Juan II of Galicia as Imperator totus Hispaniae, a title previously held by Alfonso VI, marking rule over the Iberian Peninsula. This proclamation led to mass panic, as soon Zaragoza and Burgos, weakened by infighting the decades prior, fell quickly to the Christian force. Calls for deposition rang in Seville, and a mob almost tore the young sultan apart in the streets. He was only saved thanks to a lesser military man and a possible lover of the sultan's mother Layla, known as Yatabid Al-Mutamid. Yatab was quickly appointed Hajib, and proving a capable commander, he decisively crushed the emperor of all Spain. Rather than letting the princes once again govern their own affairs, Yatab imposed upon the defeated realm a new system, granting to a selected Mozarab Christian the title of King of Asturias, and annexing the city of Compostela directly into the Sultanate. Returning home from the campaign, Yatab was made regent for Sultan Yusuf, but upon the child's untimely death, which some attribute to Yatab's doing, the Hajib took the crown for himself, marrying the former Sultana Layla to consolidate his claim. Thus came to an end the rule of the Banu Abad, and began the rise of the Yatabid Sultanate. This would be one of the most consequential states in history. They would help the English defeat their French rivals, establishing a powerful Plantagenet monarchy. They would become bitter rivals of the Ottoman sultans in Constantinople, partnering even with Christians to weaken their eastern foe. And they would discover a new world in the west, establishing a lariat of jade stretching from California to India. Though, all of that is a story for another time.